Hey, I'm Naya. Welcome back to the channel. So today I decided, as you can tell by the title of the video, that we should talk about some strategies and just things you should be mindful of when you try to outplay your opponent. There are so many RNG moments in Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, the dice roll, top decking, initial opening hands, and you can do nothing about that. But if you can be more skillful than your opponent, you're immediately at an advantage, obviously. So let's get right into it. All right, before we get into it, I should just warn you that I have an extreme cold, so my voice might sound a bit raspy and weird, so just bear with that, please. So with that out of the way, the first thing I wanted to mention, and honestly, I mean just briefly mention, this is like a bonus tip, I guess, time and time rules and everything connected to that. And I wanted to start this off by saying, you should never, ever time stall your opponent. It's not a tip. This is just something I wanted to mention, just to get it out of the way. You should not do that because it's just shitty. Just don't do it. Now, there are, however, ways to outplay your opponent when it comes to time. And the only situations I'm talking about is if, for example, you're in a losing situation or your opponent combos you and you can tell that he's quite good, you don't really want to break his board and try. Because I see people so many times, they sit there and they try to break the board for 20 minutes or something. They just struggle and sweat and then they lose in time. And then you can hear them being all pissed off, like, oh, I lost to time. No, you didn't. You lost to yourself because you would not scoop. You only have 40 minutes, so just make them count, you know? This is the first thing. And then the other one I wanted to mention is, if you're getting close to time, however, and you can do nothing about that whatsoever, just don't go first. Like, if you only have 5 minutes on the clock, why would you go first if you cannot burn within your strategy? So if you have no way of burning your opponent and winning by that way, just don't go first because you get a battle phase. Like, people don't count their minutes right, I think, or they don't look at the clock ever. So if you can have a battle phase, I think I would much rather just go second, since your opponent is most likely gonna think you're gonna go first anyway. So they might end up breaking on something, like going second cards or something like that, and you have a much bigger chance of just attacking and securing even 50 life points of difference, you know? So that's something to note. I would see people all the time, they, for example, choose to go second, but then they don't consider time and they will combo off for like 4 minutes or something like that. And they're like just summoning left and right, you know, making their biggest combo just to lose in time because they didn't go into the battle phase. Now, I understand you cannot always just normal summon and do it, but if you can do it fast, like in a fast fashion, just go to the battle phase, attack for like 100 damage, and then you can combo in main phase too if you want. But not like do senseless stuff, because that does not progress the game state, so it's considered stalling, so don't do that. But if you're able to do your full combo after you went into the battle phase, just do it in main phase too. And if time is called, great. You're at an advantage, you're like 100 life points up, and you win. So those are the, 3 things I wanted to point out when it comes to time, and please don't time stall, because just don't. All right, so the first thing we're gonna talk about is basically Valor or Impermanence versus skill drain. This is something you see like a lot of the times, and people just they wonder, why is it that a thing works like this and then another thing works a bit differently, even though it essentially does the same thing, it negates the card. And the difference is, if for example someone was to normal summon Rescue Cat, which is applicable because Shy Brigade is a thing, you would have to negate it on summon. So why is that? If cards target, for example, Impermanence, Valor, they choose that card, okay, that card is now negated. You do not dodge that if you tribute it for cost, because, and this is important, the important part, cards always resolve where they activate. So if it got activated on field where it was successfully negated by something like Impermanence, and someone actually uses it later in the turn, it's gonna get negated. But then a card like Skill Drain or Monarch's Erupt, something that does not target, that does not specifically say that card is going to get negated, but it has a different requirement. And this is the difference. It needs the cards to be face up on the field to be negated. And that's why you can dodge it if you get it off of the field. Because yeah, it's going to resolve where it activated, but it cannot be negated if it's not face up. It just like escapes skill drain in a way because it needs to be face up. And since it's not going to get negated. And then another important part to note is if something is a quick effect, like Pancratops, like Ray, things like that they can chain to Veiler, to Impermanence, to Chalice, you should just chain it if you feel like it's a good trade-off, because then it's going to like escape before resolve as the last chain link, and it's going to go through because the Veiler, Impermanence, whatever, did not resolve yet. So this is the main difference. Something needs to remain face up to be negated with a card like Skill Drain. And some cards, they just negate. It's just how it is. They target, they negate, and it's going to resolve negated because it was activated on the field. All right, so the next example is going to be when you can activate a continuous spell or trap, its effect in particular on activation, or you choose to not do it. And what's the difference? And what actually gives you advantage and what doesn't. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, for example, the most recent one is Shaddoll Schism and Ghost Bell. So if you go Ghost Bell on Shaddoll Schism, why people activate it and just don't use the effect right away, it's because later on when the opponent Ghost Bells the effect, since it banishes from grave as part of the effect, nothing will happen to Schism. The activation of the effect will be negated, but since Ghost Bell does not destroy, Schism will remain face up on field and you'll be able to use the effect later on in your turn as well. But if you were to go, for example, Schism, use the effect immediately, then when Ghost Bell negates the activation, it's still in the window of activation of the actual card. It's not the effect separately. So it's going to go to the graveyard because it wasn't effectively activated yet because of Ghost Bell's negation. So this is why sometimes you should just let cards remain face up, use the effect later on so you can actually have something from it on your following turn. And similarly to that, for example, Ghost Ogre, it's not exactly being played, but it used to be a thing, so just why not mention it? When cards, their effects, I should say, activate an activation, such as Tinky, then you cannot choose. So if you just activate the card, they cannot Ghost Ogre, since it was not technically already face up on the field before that. So Ghost Ogre doesn't even meet its requirements. So what you can do is just activate it, resolve it successfully. If, however, you have a card like, for example, Personal Spoofing. This, I guess, can be applicable now since Altergeist is somewhat remotely played. This does not activate an activation, so you can choose when to use the effect, but you can decide to use it immediately. So this is the state we're in. Basically, you use Spoofing's effect immediately, pitch cost, and they cannot ogre. And that is why, yeah, it's based up on the field, obviously, but it's still in the, like I mentioned before, and this is a weird expression, but it's the only way I can describe it, is the window of the activation of the card. So it's not technically already face up on the field from before. Ghost Ogre will not be able to meet its requirements, and you can resolve it successfully. But if you were like, okay, I'll just flip it face up, for example, I don't know, maybe you just made a misplay or you had Faker already, you wanted to resolve it, whatever. If it's face up already, then obviously Ghost Ogre can just be used because so you activate it, pay cost, and then they Ghost Ogre, and then is destroyed and does not go through. So you need to decide when to use certain types of effects. For example, with Ghost Bell, it was a better line of play to leave it face up, whereas with something like Spoofing, something that you want to resolve, you should just protect it in a way by using it immediately. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just a little bit about priority. Now, I will not explain priority to you. It's something you can look up and just learn about it if you wish. I just want to provide a couple scenarios that I feel like are interesting when it comes to priority, and it actually teaches us a lot. So the first one, the most recent one, is with Prankit's Weather Washer, and basically Washer prevents your opponent's cards and effects from being activated until the end of the damage step. So when you get to the battle step, which is right before the damage step, you as a turn player can activate the first thing, do the first action. So if you choose to attack as the first thing, then the washer effect kicks in. Your opponent will not be able to respond because you go back to the battle step again. You can attack with something else. They still won't be able to respond. And you just effectively attacked with every single thing you have. If it's a Blankets monster, obviously. So this is just a quick recent example that we are probably quite familiar with. But we have a couple old ones that are so interesting and used to come up back in the day. For example, here, we have Borreload. Now, when Borreload dropped, Guru was a bit more heavily played. So this was a way to out the field spell effect, which, if you did not know, it says once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can change one face-down defense position sub-terror monster you control to face-up attack or defense. Then you can negate the attack. And then Borreload, the most important effect is going to be that your opponent's cards and effects cannot activate when you choose his effect to reduce a face-up monster's attack by 500. So basically what you would do is, using priority, go to the battle phase, attack. On attack declaration, you would activate Borreload's effect because you are the first person that is able to respond to any action. And on the declaration, there is only like one chain that will be built, and your opponent cannot go, oh, in a separate chain, I'll just activate the field spell since it's on the attack declaration. It does not work like this. So if you use the effect, you target Silkitos, which is right here, for example, Silkitos, since we used Altergeist for a previous example, you reduce its attack by 500, and then you just move to the damage step because your opponent cannot respond to your effect. So when you move to the damage step, you can activate his other effect, which just takes the monster it's battling. You take Guru, and you just went around the field spell and the Guru flip effect. So this is how using priority can get you like in a better position. Also, for example, since we have Altergeist here, Altergeist Concarry is the same. On attack declaration, it's gonna special summon itself, negate something, negate the attack. But if you use, for example, Borreload, steal something from them, and do the same trick where you reduce something else, they won't be able to use Concarry. So it's like, it's priority, but it's a bit more situational. I figured it's interesting to put it in here, and maybe someone learned something from it. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is, when should you activate your back row removal? Now, there are two topics regarding that. One of them is going first, when you really need to side in back row removal for different reasons. Maybe you just don't have other cards to side in, or you heavily need it in that certain matchup. And then the other scenario is going second into a back row heavy board. So the first one is, if you're going first, you really need to side in back row removal, maybe consider just not setting it. I know this sounds like a bit counterintuitive, since if you're playing against a back row heavy deck, you want them to set their cards, and then in end phase, you just, for example, activate Twin Twister or Cosmic Cyclone, get rid of something immediately. But something to consider is that you're exposing your back row removal that might end up being the only thing that actually saves you on your turn when you try to play. So this ties into the other example, which is going second into a back row heavy board. So there are things to consider. I'm not all for just always blind sniping things and hoping you hit something, because now one of the examples, which is not very likely, but they might have orders. So this is something that, like, if you're, for example, right now, Drytron, Tri-Brigade, even Virtual World, every deck almost can play order. So if you're thinking that they might have it, just consider waiting, because maybe it's legit the only thing that can save you the game. And if you go into a board, you should be very, very mindful of what they might have. And this is this also ties in the fact that you should always be like considerate of different decks, of their builds, of their techs, of their cards, because going into a board, you can make a mental list. You can be like, oh, so this is Tri-Brigade. They might have Order, they might have Revolt, they might have Strike, Torrential, Impermanence. And if you know the decks, you can do this, like this list in your hand, in your head for every single deck. And then you just think, okay, if they have something that's chainable, do I want to even consider using Twin Twisters right now, or should I just wait? This was also very important not back in the day, but like a couple months back when Outplay was a thing a bit more. You would think, so if they have Conquistador, for example, why would I want to use Twin Twisters now? Just blind snipe into it if I can wait for them to activate it since it's continuous, chain it, prevent it from actually doing anything to me. So this is why I wanted to discuss this, because sometimes if you prepare good enough, if you're like thinking of cards that might be played in different decks, you can consider what your opponent might have set and then just think, do I want to chain? Do I want to snipe? Do I want to wait? So maybe consider checking out one of my previous videos. It's a Tribrigade deck profile of my friend who won with the deck, and he mentioned something like it was a play against Prank Kids where he considered his Twin Twister, even the cost for it, to the point where it would have won him the game anyway, probably, but he outplayed his opponent in an incredible fashion. So maybe go look for that. It's very interesting. So yeah, this was just it was a brief advice, I guess, on back row removal, because sometimes it just seems that it's so strong, but if you use it incorrectly, you just might like legit be so mad that you didn't I guess think about your plays well enough. If you're lucky enough, because you need to draw the back row removal, you cannot search it. So if you're lucky enough to draw it, I want you to actually be able to use it well. So this next one is going to be, this is probably my favorite one because it's so interesting to me, but it's going to be missing the timing. And I have two examples here. One of them is, well, both of them are how you can make cards miss timing, because you can do it if you know how to play your cards properly. So some cards miss timing because they say when. This is like a commonly known fact. And the most important thing to note regarding that is they can only respond if their requirement was met as chain link 1. So, for example, I use Thunder Dragon as an example because Thunder Dragon Titan is a when effect. And it says, when a Thunder Monster's effect is activated in the hand, even during the damage step, you can destroy one card on the field. And cards like these, and also, for example, Paleozoic traps from the graveyard, they need to be chained directly to the effect that they like say in their text. So he needs to be chained directly to a thunder monster's effect activated in the hand. So you as the opponent can always prevent some cards, and it's the same with the paleo traps. If you activate anything in response because you have the ability to respond, then their when effect misses timing. So if my opponent was to go Thunder Dragon effect and I chain something, anything, for example, spoofing, since Altergeist is like a theme of ours in this video, I guess, then their Titan just cannot activate. Now, obviously, yeah, they resolved on the dragon, get another one, so maybe you should be mindful of that, but this does not matter at this point. Now, here I prepared another example. Let's just get to it. Alright, so with cards like Torrential Tribute, for example, it's a when effect. And how you can effectively play around that is it needs to respond to the last thing happening, like needs to be its requirement. So if the summon is not technically the last thing that happened, it cannot be activated. So if you go, for example, Chainlink 1 Pranket's Place, I immediately won. So if I go Chainlink 1 Pranket's Place and then Chainlink 2 Lampsies and everything resolves backwards, the last thing that happened was Pranket's Place reducing Sokidis' attack points. So this is how you can, if you know, or if you don't know, you just suspect they have it, this is how you can play around things. When you know there's a when effect, just make it so the last chain link is, or the first one, the last one to resolve, is not something that makes their card meet its requirements. Alright, so the last one, I'll try to be very brief because it's quite simple to understand, and this video has gone on long enough. So if you're still here, thank you, consider liking, consider subbing. Let's just go. So basically, it's the main difference between cards, actually I should say, negating cards that are able to affect only themselves or also other cards. And I'm taking as an example like Axis Code Talker, Appaloosa, Golden Lord, Flor de Lis, like which, groups do they fit into? So cards like Access Code and Appaloosa, for example, they activate on summon, they give themselves a boost. So if they were to be negated, it just wears off, they don't have the attack anymore, and it's because they can only affect themselves. And I realize I'm generalizing this a lot, but it's mostly how it works. And then there are cards like Golden Lord, like Fleur de Lis. And I know Golden Lord is usually, it affects only himself when you're actually using it, but his card text says you can summon any zombie monster from hand. And this is the key difference, because he can affect something else as well. And Flor boosts every single Agmatica card on board. So if you were to Valor Impermanence, Golden Lord, Fleur de Lis, the boost would remain, Lord's Protection would remain. And it's only because it can also affect other cards as well. So I think this is something very important to remember, because I see people using Impermanence and Valor just wrong, thinking, oh, I'll just imperm the Lord, he's not gonna be at 35 anymore, but it's just not the case. So this is something that I heavily advise you to consider and remember and just think about a lot when you're playing. All right, so that's it. I wanted to just include a couple examples that I could think of. And if you would want to see that type of video again in the future, please let me know down in the comments, because I could talk about gameplay and rules and stuff like that for like hours, which obviously I won't do right now. If you would want to listen to me talk about it for hours, I'll consider making like 100 videos about that, legit. So please let me know. If you enjoyed, as always, give me a like and a sub, and check out Twitch, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.